All right, welcome back, everybody. I am so glad that you are able to join us today. I've been looking forward to this panel since we started planning JAM. This panel session is called Navigating the Currents of Post-Secondary Education. And I think the past few years, it's fair to say, has been a bit of a challenging time for the post-secondary sector with shifting demographics and different educational expectations, changes to immigration, Canada policy and practice with some new ones announced just earlier this week. It's led to some difficult economic circumstances, and that has led to many institutions in the BC transfer system facing both new challenges as well as opportunities to help serve learners and their community. One of the distinguishing features of the BC transfer system, one of the things that I enjoy the most, is the high level of collaboration and integration between our member institutions that help support learner access, credit transfer, as well as laddering and student mobility. The focus of this session is to explore perspectives from different educational leaders on approaches and priorities to continuing and enhancing collaboration in support of the post-secondary transfer ecosystem. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce David Burns, Associate Vice President Academic from Kwantlen Polytechnic University. We have Marc Bavin, Associate Registrar from the University of Victoria. We have Titi Kunkel, Vice President Academic, Students and International from Coast Mountain College. And we have Yusuf Varachia, from Vice President External Relations and Community Engagement from Langara College. Welcome, everybody. All right, so the purpose of this conversation is to just get your candid views on what's going on. I'm going to ask you some questions. Just as a reminder, we are monitoring the chat, so if you have questions for our panelists, please be sure to use the chat or the question and answer, and I'll be able to relay them to our panelists. So just to kick things off with a nice and easy question, I'm going to start with you, Marc, and I'm going to ask you, in light of economic pressures, how are institutions currently balancing access and sustainability in supporting transfer students?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm pleasure to be here and look forward to chatting with everyone. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think to sort of frame the conversation on this, it might be helpful to kind of pull back about a decade or so to think about how we have gotten to where we are, some of the external forces that have maybe um, put us all in different positions when we think about transfer and the provision of access to students across our excellent transfer system. As a product of the transfer system myself, I definitely value that portability, et cetera. But I think as all of us have faced at varying levels, having to think about how to be sustainable financially as institutions from a funding perspective, um, different policy changes that have happened over that time period that have maybe made incentivize the creation of terminal programs at each of our respective institutions, also to help support, ensuring that we're each sustainable in tougher and tougher financial times. That has sort of, I think, increased the independence of a lot of our institutions in many ways in how we develop programs, which I think brings us to today when then there are other policy changes perhaps that might put pressures on particularly our college colleagues and other institutions, um, as well as universities to different extents as well. Then it kind of brings back, I know I can say from the UVic perspective, we have certainly been feeling the pain as well, as far as how Camosun, you will not be surprised, would be one of our main um, local feeders that is right next door. What makes it difficult for them in terms of students coming in to their programs makes it difficult for institutions like UVic. So certainly we're all thinking about the opportunities for reopening some of the dialogue about how we can work together, play from each other's strengths, and also with that, benefiting not only each of our institutions, but potentially also students in creating more access to more degrees at more institutions, or more, whether it's degrees or other programs. Let's not forget as well, there's a lot of students who complete, say, a bachelor's degree, and then they look at other programs in say diplomas or applied programs as well. So I think it's a bit of an inflection point right now for us to start thinking about how we refocus on the transfer system and perhaps engage in that way.
I wonder if any of our other panelists would like to weigh in on some of the economic pressures and how it's influencing your institutions and its ability to support the transfer system. David, Yusuf, or Titi?
I could perhaps. Oh, go ahead.
No, please, David.
Of course, a long silence, and then when one of us decides
Yeah.
to go, several people know. You're going to have to go first, I'm afraid.
Okay, we'll go Yusuf and then we'll go David.
That's awesome. I think in my conversations with many of the institutions that are probably on the screen here and with us today, the financial impact is very difficult. We do need to readjust. We are seeing smaller class sizes, smaller enrollment, so we are pivoting. At Langara College currently right now, we're going through some difficult times. We are going through some changes. It's really hard for us right now because even if we lose a staff member or a faculty member, it's someone that's been part of our community, someone who we've really become close with and who's contributed. And we're seeing people with some layoffs. So it's extremely difficult. And right now it's about getting the morale up, getting people back together and figuring out how we're going together get us into the future. So that I do want to mention, I think my heart goes out to everyone that has to go through this. It's not easy. And that's kind of where we're at right now because those changes are happening as we speak.
All right, and David?
Hey, building on that, I think it works nicely, actually, what I was going to say. That one of the problems with this era is because of how painful these circumstances are for so many people in all of our institutions. One of the things that we often do in reaction to such stressful conditions in the sector is to look more and more inward and to be more and more protective looking in. When something like with trade wars, right? If you raise your tariffs, everybody else raises their tariffs and the entire system grinds down, right? But to have a healthy system in the aggregate, which benefits all of the institutions in it individually in the long run, we have to continue to be as open as we can to the free movement of students with appropriate things for PLAR and transfer credit and all these kinds of recognitions. Because if we start to look too closely just to protect our corner of the system, the whole system will serve students less well, and that'll be to all of our detriments over time. And so fighting to a certain extent that urge to look more and more inward and be more and more insular, I think is going to be a really important part of not only serving the students we have, but ensuring the sector can stay healthy through some very challenging times.
That's very well said, David, and that echoes a lot of my own thoughts on this. Titi, do you want to weigh in as well?
Yes, just like you've heard, we're equally going through a tough time as well. So we're looking at layoffs, and as mentioned, these are people who've been with a community and built the institution. Some of the downside of going through layoff is that we have to make very tough choices. And in some cases, and we hear it on the news, we hear from other colleague institutions. I mean, there are program closures. There are program reduction and all these different streamlining pieces that we have to do. The bigger piece is how do we maintain quality programming where at this time we're focusing on the streamlining that needs to happen. And also, what are the support systems, or how do we make sure that we maintain the support system in place so that not just the quality of program delivery, but how are students learning? Because in order to move from one institution and transfer to another institution, they need to get the grades, which means they need to complete the outcomes. And how are these things impacting the streamlining? We're having to say, unfortunately, goodbye to some really good people in the system. And then how are we maintaining, quality of education while we're doing this? So that's a very important question that I carry with me as we're going through, this difficult time. And, as mentioned, it kind of breaks my heart when we have to say goodbye to someone. So the impact is not just at the institutional level, but there's a wider impact in, where we find ourselves today as a result of economic pressures. Thank you.
I appreciate those comments, and I can see that some of those comments are really resonating in the chat. I appreciate people putting their comments into there. I want to pivot to something that we were actually talking about in the green room just a minute ago, and that is the impact on federal immigration policy changes. And I'll start with you, Yusuf. What impact has recent federal immigration policy changes had on learner pathways and institutional planning? And there were a few changes announced just a few days ago from the federal government. So I'd like to get your perspective on that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, we just heard what some of the financial impacts are and the impact it's had on our communities. Internally, it's been really difficult. I will just mention, in the green room, we were with Marc mentioned, being at CBIE and hearing about the new caps that are happening. I think it's about being calm right now and waiting to get more information because we need to get more clarity on what those impacts are. From our side here at the college, we're thinking it's just this is what the target numbers were, and it's just the system adjusting itself. But there's more to come, so we are keeping calm and just moving forward with what we need to do. The impact, everyone year with us today is experiencing this impact. From learner pathways to institutional planning, a lot of changes are happening, but there are some positive things that are happening. David, you mentioned a little bit earlier about looking internally. Well, we have to look internally a little bit more. And that has been something that we've been working on. I know within BC colleges, but especially at Langara, we've been really getting back to what is our purpose? Who are we? To really figure out how we as a community can get through this. And for us, it was really coming down to, well, why are students coming to us? Are we making sure that we're seeing things through what we say is a priority through an Indigenous and student lens? Is that what we're doing? And for us, we've come up with two things. At Langara, students are coming to Langara for two reasons. And number one, they want to transfer to some of the top research universities here in British Columbia and other institutions. And number two, they want an academic credential that's going to get them a career or a start to a meaningful career or employment. That's who we are, and that's what we need to really focus on. So for us, it's really digging deep down, understanding what our values are, and staying true to who we are as a colleges and getting that information out to our community. For us, it's actually bringing our community together and having a deeper understanding of our purpose. And that's what's really important. So all our institutional planning, all our mapping, everything we're doing with our courses is taking this into consideration, and the learner pathways. There are a lot of people that we are in conversation with some of the other institutions. Marc, I'm going to mention you because I do thank you for your direction, for your willingness to collaborate. There are people, and I could just tell by my colleagues across the screen, there is hope. There is a future for BC if we collaborate and do things just a little bit stronger. For us, we've got transfer agreements that are in place, but are we actually digging deeper? A lot of this is paper to paper. It's just, these are the transfer, this is how it's going to be. But for many of us, it's more than that. If we go through an Indigenous lens, and what we've done with the University of British Columbia with our Indigenous transfer and Simon Fraser University, it's more than just articulations. It needs to be more and a more of a holistic approach where we're actually looking at scholarships, we're looking at recruiting together, we're looking at ways to really make sure that students are scaffolded and supported through that transition. We've just been dealing with things, but we haven't really looked at things to actually leverage the current successes. For us, we're probably one of the larger feeders to the University of British Columbia. I think there's been over 750 over a year of students who want to go. SFU, I think it's about 500. UVic, I know Marc and I have talked about this. There is strong demand, not to mention BCIT, KPU, Capilano. There are things that we can do better, but our institutional planning is really focusing on how we can do a stronger job because everyone is open to those conversations, and I think we need to.
Marc, I want to maybe ask if you'd like to react and offer your reflections on the federal immigration policy changes and how they've impacted institutional planning at UVic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things, with any change that happens in terms of policy, I think there's both the immediate perceived impact that there might be at an institutional level, but there's also then the narrative of Brand Canada, which I think we're all concerned about, is that with every iteration of some kind of change, it gives potential for misunderstanding, confusion, or just the notion of, oh, there goes Canada again with more immigration changes, and it signals perhaps an unwillingness or an unwelcoming sort of sentiment. I would say just as a research institution, certainly the recent news on the research agenda, there's positive reaction, I'm sure, especially from the U15 and the larger research institutions in particular, maybe less so the UVics and the sort of those in the middle. They're just underneath our top 5 institutions, for example. So I think what we've seen as well is the impact on our graduate applications over the last year in particular. I'm not sure what this latest round of updates will signal. Maybe some of the notes that come out of the changes. Again, we're waiting for ministerial instructions to kind of get better detail on exactly what all of this means. But suffice to say that we're all adjusting. I think it's hopefully good news overall when the province has to look at allocations with this smaller number of PALs that will be sent across the province, that they're not having to factor in graduate programs, and so that will indirectly, I guess, also impact colleges and non-research institutions as well. So the hope is that maybe there's some easing there, but yeah, I think as Yusuf says, separate from that, and even looking at our undergraduate, and again focusing on the international population here, not taking for granted the relationships that we have in the province and the transfer system that exists, and beyond just perhaps the agreements that sit on top of all the well-articulated courses across the institution, not just sort of taking that for granted and resting on the paper that is signed between any institutions, but actually thinking about, okay, well, how are we doing right by students, and ensuring that we're giving them access. And I think that's a real opportunity right now for BC as a whole to sort of look at how we can actually broaden and increase access to different offerings for students, regardless of where they start, and allowing students to start in communities and locations, for example, that are either closer to their community, supporting local communities in different parts of the province. That's another factor, is trying to support all the various corners of the province. Having come from the East Kootenays myself, I definitely understand what the impacts can be with just small number changes. So anyway, I think again, I'd like to try to stay similar to Yusuf on the optimistic side, and focus on what we can do both internally at the institution, but also in close partnership with our colleagues.
Titi, would you like to weigh in on how the federal immigration policy changes have impacted institutional planning at Coast Mountain?
Yes, indeed. We have been impacted by the changes. I mean, we started to see the impact from the very beginning, when the conversation started to change and the different sort of changes were imposed by RCC. And in the last year, we've actually we've determined that we're not going to be moving forward with international recruitment actively, because the number of programs that we're putting forward actually do not allow students to apply for postgraduate work permits. And we also want to make sure that, morally in line with our values, we can bring students to our communities. They can work and they can be, contributing member of the communities. And they can also get like permanent residency. because we noted that majority of the students who are coming to us, they're coming because they want to live in Canada. They want the permanent residency and become citizens at a future stage. But what we're seeing is the path to getting that. I mean, it's like the path is getting narrower and narrower with all these different changes. So we can't guarantee them that, they can get what their goal is. And some of the other pieces for us, in addition to the programs that we're putting forward, is that we have what I'll call the rural effects, because we're a rural institution in part of British Columbia, whereby we enjoy the landscape, we enjoy the geographic region, but it's not necessarily a path where people actually come to, like urban centers. And so for whatever reason, people don't understand that, life in rural and remote communities are equally vibrant. So it's not a destination like you'd have like Richmond or Vancouver or some of those urban centers. And the number of students that we bring in, we also had to be socially responsible to make sure that they can find accommodation. We don't want students that will come, move out, and the cost of living, they're unable to afford it, and then they end up on the streets or they end up on the asylum list. And our strategy with international students had always been that, we want to make sure that we're responsible, socially responsible within our communities. And we've only brought in a limited amount of students, what we believe that the communities can sustain. So with the changes that we're seeing now, we thought, we're best spending our effort with domestic students than making all these promises that we're not even sure that the students can achieve.
Wow. So that, that really does speak to the impact here. If you're no longer even actively recruiting because of the changes that impact the ability to get a work visa after graduation, that shows the significance of the impact. I want to give David an opportunity to weigh in as well from your perspective. How are things? How has the immigration policy changes impacted Kwantlen and planning on your end?
The way we're hopping back and forth with this 5-person screen, I feel like I should be telling you like how the votes are coming in suburban Toronto for CBC election. Like, okay, we're going to take a look at Scarborough right now. So key ridings are now coming in as I'm speaking. At KPU, on the theme of we don't know what's happening next in the election, one of the core challenges we've had is that as we plan for the near-term future, it becomes continually obvious that the medium term or the longer term future is volatile, and that volatility has, for the first time, at least in most of my career, really substantial geopolitical inputs in a way that have not been quite so powerfully the case, and really substantial, as we all know, federal policy inputs. And so our ability to understand where the federal government is going is this incredibly and intrinsically important component of all of our strategic planning, whereas before, we were able much more to think about what we were offering and our relationships with counterparties and in other countries as the way we can plan for what's going to happen next. We've got a very substantial requirement now to continually monitor and consider the political situation and how some of these major public policy decisions will play out. And one of the things that was quite interesting in the conversations this week was that the budget includes significant targeted, but also fairly general cuts to the federal public service. And because of the way in which policy implementation has also turned out to be quite significant, as apart from stated and explicit policy, how the civil service develops federally over time will also have a surprisingly large impact, I think, on how our institutions need to plan for our budgets in the future.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of known unknowns, and obviously the budget that's been proposed this week by the federal government, at least as of the airing of this session, is still not yet approved, right? So there could be some changes as they unfold. I want to pivot a little bit to the BC transfer system and talk about how the transfer system is known for its high level of collaboration. I wanted to get your thoughts on what factors you think help sustain that, and what are some of the risks you see going forward. And we'll start with you, Titi.
Thank you. Yeah, the transfer system has been it's been around for quite a while, and it's been very, very successful. It's an integral part of the BC post-secondary system. I think some of the factors that's actually made it successful are more like the governance structure. and just having the post-secondary institution, I mean, having whether it's faculty or administrators or leaders, be a part of the council and be a part of the decision making, and also be a part of, policy development. So the structure of, the governance is a key factor. And then the collaboration amongst the member institution as well. But I think one of the best things about it is the articulation meeting, which is led by faculty members, because it's the opportunity that brings people together from all the different institutions to talk about the details of programming and to ensure that, programs are transferable, courses are transferable. Now, from a student's perspective, the ability to go to one institution and be able to transfer, whether it's individual courses or whether it's block transfer or whether it's the 2+2 system. And it gives students that sort of comfort and confidence that, what I'm doing, I can actually move from where I am and move to other institutions. So it's not like you're gathering all these credits at a particular institutions that then becomes like end of road because you can't go anywhere with it. But the ability to take this amongst, within institutions in the province is one of the success. And some of the pieces that I'm aware of that is happening right now is the ability to be able to transfer out to other provinces as well. So that kind of broadens the scope. So not only are we looking internal within BC, looking at the private and the public post-secondary, but now we're able to start looking outwards and hopefully internationally as well. And it's such a unique system that I think some of the risk for us as we're streamlining and as we see that the government coffers is quite limited, that funding, I think, is a risk for us. I mean, if the government decide not to fund the system, I think it will be a big negative, And so some of the things that we also need to be conscious of is institutions are streamlining. We're making an adjustment right now, and we're actually having JAM online virtual. Yeah, so that's also a risk if we continue to have like our meetings online or articulation meetings all online. So that's a big risk because those conversations that happen in person, we'll be missing out on that. It's those conversations, that's where we see collaboration. That's where we see problem solving. That's where we see programs, discussions about program and how they move between across institutions. So it's important for us to bear that in mind as we move forward, as things progress, that, maybe we have to make space or make allowance to continue to have those in-person meetings. Yeah. So those are the risks, the immediate risk that I see within the economic climate that we're at right now. Yeah.
Right. I'd like to pass the thank you for that, Titi. And I'd like to get your perspective, Yusuf, on what you see are some of the factors that have helped sustain the transfer system, but also some of the risks as you see them.
Thank you very much. For me, I come from the Ontario system, so coming out to BC and seeing the transfer system, it's incredible. And earlier I talked about transferring to some of the research institutions, but it's about access to us. And I think what is so important, and we need to really double down on that, is what the transfer system does. It is providing access for everybody here in British Columbia and anywhere, I guess, globally to come here. Access is access to other colleges. People move, people change. This system allows people to transfer to other colleges, to transfer to the universities, polytechnics, all of that. It's so, so important and vital. We see what's happening in the States, but we want to make sure that education is accessible to all. And this is why I think we need to really get our heels in and really showcase this is where it's at. I think a risk, but it's also an opportunity, is we need to continue to market our system, because right now when I'm in internationally, people are not aware of what makes British Columbia unique. I just came back from a couple trips. I was in Africa. I was in, throughout Africa. I was just in Vietnam. Um, People are not aware of the transfer system here, and I think we need to do a little bit more education there. It's a risk, but it's an opportunity because this is what really sets us apart. Also, we have a lot of newcomer settlement, people who are new to Canada, and who are domestic students also. Their families are not aware of the great thing that the college system does and the relationship we have with the other post-secondary institutions. So I think that's a risk if we don't continue to do that more, because there's a real important educational piece. But for us, the other risk is, you know, by not doing this kind of stuff, we are going to limit the number of people that have access to education. So I really pushing down on access, because to me that is the strength and probably one of the most important things for Langara, and I know for the sector, is what we do here.
I appreciate that comment. I'm making notes here for action items to follow up after we get out of this session. Maybe I'll turn over to you, David, and get your perspective on some of the risks as well as some of the things that factors that sustain the transfer system.
Certainly. Well, I think one of the key variables that might not be obvious for people who've sort of grown up in British Columbia, I'm from another province too, is the buy-in, the amount of buy-in in the sector to contribute to and be active participants in the BC transfer system is really significant. And you can't force that. That cannot be instructed even from a ministerial level. And it is an ecosystem, and it's quite a healthy one, and it's a natural one in the sense that people participate actively and voluntarily, right? And there's an excellent argument to be made that that's a really unique component of the BC system. I think the challenges it faces is that each of our institutions, as we remodulate how we administer our bureaucratic systems internally, is going to need to consider how we can both improve user experience. And that's something I was going to mention a little bit later in terms of interacting with the system if you're a student, whilst also ensuring that we can reduce cost in some of these key administrative areas. And I think over time, the expectation for how systems like this work is just going to keep increasing, because consumer technology is increasingly fluid and increasingly serving of your interests in a really customized way. It's going to be hard to keep up with that. And at the same time, we're going to need to do at least what we're doing now with significantly fewer resources. And managing that paired challenge, I think, is going to be a really significant component to the future, particularly in the case of registrar's offices and transfer systems.
Absolutely. Reduction in workforces is going to be, we're already feeling stretched thin, and it looks like it's going to get a little bit thinner. I want to maybe turn to you, Marc, and get your perspective.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about the same factors. We're in this period right now where we're losing, as we discussed earlier with Titi mentioning, just around this, losing some of the very good people and the knowledge that we have in the sector. I'll say from having worked in the college sector and in the university sector, there's a heavy lift that a lot of our college colleagues do in terms of the advising support that goes into informing students who don't know about the transfer system once they arrive. And I think that sort of knowledge base, I worry about the risk there of losing, as we're all having to consider resources. We're losing knowledge with some of those people. And so I think, as Yusuf mentions, I think in order for us to continue to do the work of supporting transfer, we have to kind of rethink about how to socialize transfer also within our systems as we're all going through changes. There's a lot of the people-to-people ties, so I would also agree the interpersonal aspects, and having those spaces and opportunities for our institutions to connect with each other, particularly at those various key functions where we can stay connected and so that we're actively engaging each other. I'm just thinking of examples of UVic engaging with the advising community, and how we keep updates live with our partners is important. But yeah, I just think there's certainly the culture here and the history of understanding transfer, so that's ingrained, and now it's just about, in this tougher climate, as we're losing resources or having to streamline to not lose some of the knowledge with it, and figure out how we can combat those losses.
Thanks so much for all those comments. I wanted to do a bit of a pivot here and talk a little bit about technologies and the impact that it's having on transfer. Obviously, we're hearing a lot about artificial intelligence, and here at BC Cat, we're doing some deep dives into how AI can support transfer credit processes. But there's also been the emergence of digital credentials, different transfer platforms. I'm curious how you see technology either supporting or disrupting current transfer processes, and are those good things that could be happening right now? Why don't we start with you, David?
Well, I think one of the first things that is, I think, quite important when we start these conversations in the sector right now is to try to slow down and make more nuanced our discussions about such technology, particularly with artificial intelligence. Now, if you can pick one human thing that has not been utterly and totally transformed every day for the last 2 years, according to some press release or a consultant, I would be quite surprised. And so we're finding that I think a lot of discussion about the future of AI is driven not by how we can meaningfully deploy it in even the medium term, but rather by the rhetoric necessary to raise the vast sums of money required to continue operating large language models and developing them. And so we have to get a little bit through the hype to understand what the real applications are. And, there was a study in Semaphore a couple of weeks ago that said if you give the leading AI tools, essentially testing all of the 7 or 8 big ones, basic tasks that a freelancer would perform, it can succeed in doing it 1 or 2 times for the most part out of 100. And so that's important, and that can have significant potential in the future, but we have to make some very good nuanced decisions about how to deploy that technology. And micro-credentials are a very good example. The way that micro-credentials have evolved have followed a similar arc, where the initial discussion of micro-credentials was that they would upend credentials themselves entirely, and that this would redefine education in a very substantial way. And what's emerged is that they're a really helpful, targeted value add in many cases to things we were doing before. So they're deployed primarily in continuing studies as a form of short recognition without really transforming how those continuing studies really operate. And so finding what that real value proposition is for this technology is going to be increasingly important. And in that, anytime it interacts with what a credential is, we need to think first about what the credential is for. We tend to think, okay, we've got a wonderful technology here. How can we deploy it? How can it change things? How can it disrupt things? But in the space of credentials, the value of a credential just is the stability that it uses to store the recognition it confers. So your degree is not portable in the way that a picture you send your friend on social media is portable, of course, but it is portable in the sense that it recognizes and it has that stamp of approval and certification from a body like a university, for example, that is recognized as a stable judge of what people can do and have learned over time. And so as we disrupt what we think credentials are and how we communicate them to people, we're always in this position of saying, okay, does this protect and appropriately serve the underlying purpose of a credential itself, which is actually necessarily very, very stable over time. Whereas a lot of these technological disruptions, the tool comes and then is replaced very shortly thereafter. We're on the 5th or 6th ChatGPT in this short period. So when we're talking about these technologies, we have to be very careful to ask ourselves what we're trying to use the technology to actually do. Because if we're not careful, we could undermine the central value of the thing that we're trying to disrupt. Now, as I said a minute ago, I think the real push in the short term is going to be on the experience of students. In an era where you can ask very quickly how to do something and within seconds have a response back that can guide your behavior, and in many cases it will be accurate, it's becoming increasingly hard to explain to students why it should take 6 months to find out whether your courses apply or 5 months to find out whether your prior learning can be recognized. Because of course, no other decisions in their lives work like that anymore. Not even interactions with federal government over something like passports tend to take that long. And so one of the core areas I see for technology improving what we're doing and supporting transfer is in supporting our ability to serve students in the way that everybody in our society is coming to expect.
Yusuf, I've seen you nodding a couple of times throughout David's comments. I want to maybe turn it over to you to get your reflections on how you feel technology is either supporting or disrupting transfer practices.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, David. I took jot down a few notes there for us, and I was thinking about this a little bit earlier because we're thinking about it through that student perspective, and some of the things that I've been writing is that we're doing all of this, but actually the consumer is also our students, and we're trying to think about are there digital tools that will make this a lot more clear and faster and to support students? Because that's what we're hearing at the college right now is, there was a time when students would come and they wanted to spend more time on college, explore, figure out where they want to go. But now students are very directed with the current situation financially. Students want to come in. And we're kind of looking at, are there digital tools that will make this a little bit easier, those pathways that we'll be able to put on our website? You're interested in X program, here is the transfer, or they put a little bit of information. So we're trying to figure that out in a way because that's what we're hearing right now. So I'm really curious if anyone has some ideas on the chat. I would love to learn what others are doing because the student perspective for us right now is so important, and we want to make sure that we're understanding what's out there. Thank you.
Marc or Titi, would you like to weigh in on how technology is impacting either supporting or disrupting transfer practices? Maybe we'll start with Titi and then go to Marc.
Yes, when I think about AI and where we're at, I mean, there are different levels of acceptance of AI. There are those who resist and there are those who embrace. There's always the cost for those who are leading in terms of the first mover. And then those who come on board later, I mean, they would just kind of walk into where glitches have been cleaned up and where the use of AI is actually advanced. So they come in at a much later stage. And I think about not too many decades ago where people had to learn the multiplication table and have to recite it. And then the growth to using calculators and then scientific calculators. And then now people have cell phone. And I don't even think that you're going to ask somebody what is 9 multiplied by 8 and they'll instantly spew out the answer. So because all these things you can do it using technology these days. So I feel like there is a growth that one can expect. There are those who adopt at an early stage. So they're going to be out there innovating, and then everyone's going to catch up eventually. And I think for the most part, institutions are still trying to figure out what are the AI policies, or should we have guidelines, or how do we navigate this? And there's also the wider public that are talking about how AI is going to take away jobs from people. So there's that hesitance from a lot of people. So the conversations are different depending on where you go. But my feel is that we're going to end up, embracing AI in ways that we probably haven't imagined. When you think back not too many decades ago, when you go to a bank, I mean, you were in front of someone who was a cashier or a teller, which is what they were called way back then. And they all just took your money and gave you money back and did all those sort of functionalities. And then with the introduction of ATM, those like, oh no, it's going to take away jobs from all those people and so on. I feel like that's where we're at with AI right now. But the banks did move forward with ATMs, and the functionality of the cashiers or the tellers changed because now they're advising you on all sort of different things that one couldn't imagine that they would be doing, way back in those days. So I believe that AI is going to cause a lot of changes in terms of functionality for how we do things. It's going to change the kind of skills level that we need in certain areas. Yes, we will see some jobs disappear, but certainly we will see new ones come forward. And I feel like as we grow with AI, we would also start to find that there are ways whereby, things like our transfer system, could it be that we have some development there that, people are bringing in the transcript from wherever and we're able to make decisions faster? Could it be that we develop our system in such a way that international mobility becomes a lot easier because we now have this platform that people can use to do the evaluation even before they get into our system here? So the changes that are coming through AI, I think some of those maybe we can't imagine them right now, but I believe that they're all going to be positive changes. We're going to see maybe a redevelopment of, the things that we accept right now. And we're going to see more like different kind of skills needed to do a number of, manual, I want to say manual things. Some are not quite manual, but we're going to see new skills needed. And I feel like, we may get to a level whereby a base level of knowledge in AI is required by all students or even employees. So we may get to that level. And so all this coming, but for now, the bigger part for us is how do we embrace it? How do we bring it into what we're doing today? And how can we start to imagine, our future, within programs and within the transfer system? We need to start to imagine what that future would look like for us. Thank you.
Really well said, Titi. And I love your analogy about the ATMs and the bank tellers. I'm trying to think of the last time I used cash for anything. You know what I mean? Because it's just electronic everything, and that wouldn't have been the case, 20 years ago. Marc, I want to get your reflections on technology and the impact it's having on transfer.
Well, I'm feeling like I'm already behind and I need to enroll in some courses because after, well, even from this discussion, but also it was interesting to me to see at CBIE in Quebec City earlier this week how many sessions were centering on AI and what its applications could be to the admission process, for example. And all my registrarial colleagues will probably share both the possibility and the excitement at the same time as the fear around issues of privacy and ensuring that we're not, just thinking how to unleash a technology such as AI in certain contexts. But I think there's probably some less risky opportunities. When I think about the transfer system, for example, and how a student comes to learn about it or how they might navigate a transfer system or think about even just brainstorming what the possibilities could be for them based on where they're located and what they could do from where they are. I think I'd be curious about what applications there could be to, for example, even the BC Transfer Guide or other areas like that. Certainly also, I think there's been some discussion earlier at that conference as well around fear about AI coming in and making a lot of jobs redundant. But I think some have said that even in an admissions context, actually it's an opportunity to remove perhaps some of the more repetitive aspects, but then allow admissions officers or admission assistants or other staff to be focusing on other work that they can't get to that it requires higher level thinking or just problem solving or some of those many projects that you might have on a list that you think that you can get to in the summer, but you can't because there's no downtime anymore. So I see opportunity, certainly a little bit of both in terms of how its application to the transfer system and supporting knowledge around the transfer system, what the opportunities are. It could also be used as a tool for some of us as employees to, whether it's for process and also even just learning about opportunities within the transfer system and how we partner with institutions across BC as well.
I think certainly over the last few years, one thing that I've observed, I think about two years ago, everybody was very scared. What is AI going to do? And then it became acceptance. And now what I'm seeing is that it's being incorporated in really kind of interesting ways to really enhance the learner experiences. Like you said, you can use AI to do some of the things that are a little more routine so that you can then focus on doing the stuff that requires a higher level of skill and knowledge. And I think that's to the benefit of probably everybody. We are running up to the time, so I do want to leave some time for questions from the audience. But I did want to ask or get your reflections on, given some of the changes in the choppy waters that we're experiencing right now in post-secondary, how you feel that the transfer system can better support historically underrepresented learners, such as Indigenous learners, newcomers, or mature learners. I think I'll start with you, David, and then we'll work our way around.
You always say the name last. Like, I'll start with you, and then we're all like, is it me? Is it me? Is it me?
And David, go.
Yeah, exactly. Well, CBC is now forecasting that Marc Bavin will win his victorious South riding tonight, with 80% of polls reporting. I think one of the big things is all the research on public policy and interaction with bureaucracy tells us that marginalized persons pay more of an attentional cost in interacting with services that are supposed to provide them benefits. So paradoxically, it is harder for someone who doesn't have a lot of social capital and a lot of privilege to get access to the things that are meant to give them equal footing in society. And a big chunk of what causes that is the underlying administrative burdens that the systems put onto us. So in the United States, for example, there's this huge fight about SNAP benefits and food stamps. And part of the response to this is that it's becoming more bureaucratic to access food stamps, which means that if you're in a position where you're working so much and you can't afford food, you can barely get by, you can't afford childcare, can't afford housing, you've got to take extra steps to get enough calories in the day to go through all of that again, right? And one of the key barriers to making those systems work well is how much attention it requires and how much knowledge of forms and how much waiting it requires to get what you deserve. And so a relentless focus on reducing the burden of accessing transfer credit is one of the best public policies, I think, in making sure that underrepresented persons and marginalized persons have the access they're supposed to have and deserve to have.
Well said, David. And I'll turn now to Titi and ask the same question. How do you feel the transfer system can better support historically underrepresented learners?
I think with having a transfer system in place, I mean, I think the first step to helping create I want to say, a level field where people have access to information, because it's not behind, I want to say, maybe an iron curtain or something where they can access or they can reach it. So it is out there. But one of the pieces that will be important for us is it's there. How do we ensure that they know about it? So it's the knowing that it exists, and then the knowing that, yeah, they can access it, because right now we do have resources online. I mean, you can go online, you can see how courses transfer between institutions. So that is there. But as mentioned, it's just if people already have multiple barriers, not barriers that they created or systemic barriers, then the access may be somewhat elusive for them. Or it's not because it's not there. And some of the pieces that I think is important for us is that we know this, or we're aware of the multiple barriers, and we're aware of where the people are. The question really is, how do we take the information out to the people rather than wait for them to come? And there are projects that we've done in the past at Coast Mountain College where we've actually taken education into those communities. And taking education to the communities, we've seen a lot more people being able to access, what's out there, because they have their support system in place, and they don't have to take those additional steps for access. And in the same way, we can take some of these resources that are out there into the communities, particularly in remote communities where those people are. And it's how we do that is important, is by including leaders from the indigenous communities in conversation. Now, one of the things that I am aware that is happening at BC CAT is, including the ILS and having conversation with them. So I think they will be the best people, organizations like the ILS and the FINESC, they will be the best people to actually talk to find out how can we engage, how can we, bring this to, those communities so that they're part of the conversations in designing the solutions that's appropriate for them. So it's a better way than taking the solution. This is what we've designed, and we think you can use this. No, well, let's include them when we start thinking about solutions, or when we start having those conversations. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go to Marc, and then I'll go to Yusuf. So, Marc, over to you in terms of how you feel the transfer system can better support historically underrepresented learners.
Yeah, I think I don't have too much to add. I think, but what both David and Titi shared resonates quite a bit in terms of just that the awareness aspect, but also, thinking about how we can, as institutions individually as well, think about barriers, engage with communities that are underrepresented and marginalized or affected by systemic barriers, and trying to systematically consider how we could potentially address those. I was just thinking as we were talking about this, is that, I mean, not that to suggest, Mike, that you want to go around the province, but I would see a place almost as well in terms of awareness development at the high school level, um, of what the BC transfer system is. And I know that our guidance counselors and high schools are certain areas of the K to 12 system is aware of this, but I wonder at if there's more that we can be doing in terms of awareness development and education around what options exist, while we're also considering the barriers that may exist that we're not looking at right now, that need to be addressed.
I appreciate that comment, and I echo what you're saying. We'll give the last word over here to Yusuf.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm in agreement with everyone saying, as I mentioned earlier, this is really important, and especially with BC colleges and all post-secondaries, it's all about access. We are the level playing field for all British Columbian families, so we do need to do this. I think areas that we could strengthen is exactly what everyone is saying today. Is we need to strengthen those partnerships with community agencies, Indigenous groups. There are so many associations and communities that we are not really supporting. They're still underserved. And I think there's an opportunity to do better there. Um, we do know that we need to disrupt a lot of the structures that are in place, especially in our education system. And I think this is something that is really, really important. We're focusing on domestic students, but we want to make sure that everyone does have access. And I feel sometimes it's not just, I mean, it's same with Langara. It's something that we're really, really trying to do better is get into community a little bit more and not assume what is needed, but to make sure that we're doing what is needed to support those communities. And I think that's really missing. And making sure everything is culturally sensitive and we're aware. Every community is a little bit different, and we need to figure out what are we missing and what can we do better. So yeah, I'm in agreement, and I think there's a lot more we can do. I like the idea, Mark, about getting into the high schools. But right now, I want to get into every community group here, Mosaic, Success here in the Lower Mainland. There's an opportunity for us to make a difference in the lives of our communities. So thank you.
We are rounding out to time, and I think we are going to go a little bit over because I do want to get to some questions from the audience. But I do want to give you one last question in 30 seconds each. Can you identify one or two priorities for the next 5 years that you feel the BC transfer system should focus to help strengthen the BC transfer system? We will start with Titi, followed by Marc, David, and then Yusuf, so that you're coming.
Yes, thank you. I think my favorite one would be to look into AI and, what can we do to make things better with AI. That'll be my one. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Titi. Over to you, Marc.
Similar, I think just focusing on how I think it's a recharge of awareness development on the BC transfer system, and any effort that we can do to improve awareness both within our institutions and the communities that we're serving.
Okay, and then over to you, David.
I think the student experience of interacting with the systems, as I've said, is an absolutely fundamental one for me.
Okay, and finally, Yusuf.
I'm gonna go with all three. I think they're pretty amazing. All three.
All right, okay. Maybe we should have done a rapid fire session with questions. Really appreciate the conversation. We have a couple of questions from the audience, and so I'm just going to read them off to you, and we'll open the floor to discussion. Sarah from Columbia College asks about is circling back to our discussion about the immigration changes. Do you feel the reduction in immigration and caps on student visas justifies the number of jobs that are being lost as a result at your institution? Perhaps a controversial question. Anybody want to take a stab at answering that one? Yusuf?
I knew it was coming. I knew
Yeah.
it was coming. Um, I it's a very controversial, and it's very difficult. I don't think it's necessarily we have less students that 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 these changes are being impacted. I think there's a lot more to it. I think for us right now, it's just not saying that we have a lower number of students. I think we're really looking at what the enrollment is, those programs, the future, and the mapping. So I know I'm not answering it probably in the best way, but I don't think it's that easy to just say this is 100% based on enrollment. It's really about student need. It's looking at, were we focusing too much on the international? It was something that we've discussed at the college, that there needs to be a balance. We need to optimize our enrollment and do what's best for our community. So sorry, I wish I could answer that one a little bit better, but it's seriously, it's very, very complex and not easy.
Right. There's a question from Angus Graham, who is our council co-chair, and this gets back to our discussion about the brand of education in Canada and how it's been perceived to be damaged due to some of the challenges or changes in immigration in Canada. The transfer system is critical to the BC brand, which surpasses in some ways the Canada brand in the area of student mobility and access. The question is, how can BC CAT work with member institutions to do its part to mitigate the risk of loss of this part of the brand as institutions are drawing or looking a little more inward in these times of challenge? So maybe I'll start with you, David, again, calling on you ad hoc. Because you were the one that was talking about earlier about how some institutions are going a little more insular. So what do you think that BC CAT can do to work with institutions to help reinforce BC's brand in the post-secondary education landscape?
And another previous question, if I may, really quickly, that trade-off question is just so painful, obviously, that nobody in my position is ever going to say it's worth it, because of course I'm close to these people and there's just all kinds of suffering there. But I think the challenge in this was how quickly it happened in such a way that we weren't able to plan for a gradual restructuring in a way that would feel a lot more humane to all of us in these institutions. I think that's where the real problem was, with the pace and unpredictability of what we've gone through. That's been a huge challenge. So brand BC, I think, is the answer, actually, that when you go to a lot of these other countries and talk to people about interesting coming to Canada, and you talk to our communities here about our ability to support them, it's community to community connection. They care that they're coming to British Columbia. They care that they're coming, in my case, to say Surrey or to Richmond or Langley. And those connections are an incredibly powerful thing, because of course we have families and business connections and all these kinds of things that reach across these countries. And the richness of those communities that we all serve is one of the core benefits we have. Because like you say, if we're competing on brand Canada, it's been very significantly damaged. But if we're competing on the brand of the connections we have to communities abroad and our communities locally, we've got a really good chance at explaining the real value of coming to communities like ours.
Do any of the other panelists would like to weigh in on how BC CAT can work to help sort of mitigate some of the challenges that the Canadian brand has had on higher education?
I would just echo the same thing. Like, I think however we can again support institutions, I think it's, at the same time that I'm seeing there be that insular aspect and institutions needing to focus in, I will say simultaneously we're trying to think about, certainly from UVic's vantage point, we're trying to look at how we can work across and how we might show up in other parts of the world in collaboration with other BC institutions. And that sometimes I remember doing that at previous institutions where in the college sector, where it took a while to get people to sort of believe that this was true, that you could actually start with us and end up somewhere. And so I still think that's true today. So I think the more that we can help reinforce that message as brand BC, I think it puts us in a good position.
Right. Yusuf or Titi, would you like to weigh in? Yusuf?
Yeah, I agree with Marc. I think there's an opportunity. People need to actually see this in practice, and getting into market and showcasing the transfer system and seeing that students have transferred and showcasing that through videos or whatever it may be, that story needs to be told, and it needs to really be showcased, because that is what sets us apart.
All right. And Titi, maybe I'll give you the last word.
Thank you. So, well, I really like what Marc said about the showing up, as in you can start from one institution and end at another institution, and which is, the uniqueness of what we do. And I think that to me is maybe one of the ways that, BasicCAD can actually help promote that, BC brand as opposed to just the Canada brand. And the beauty of that transfer, literally is a transfer system that gives us the ability to be able to say that with assurance.
Well, I really appreciate all the comments and discussion. This was a very rich discussion, and we are at time. So I just want to thank all of our panelists, Marc, Titi, David, and Yusuf, for being a part of this session today. Appreciate all the comments in the chat. I'm sorry if we couldn't get to everything that was put in there, but we do appreciate the content. And with that, I will just say we're going to head into a break, and we will head into our next session starting at 11. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you at the top of the hour.